ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Night Court, the only show where justice is blind, but we sure aren't. We've seen it all. We dig it up, and then we put it on full display. Sort of like a crime scene investigator who's also an Instagram influencer. Hashtag crime scene goals. Am I right? Now, let's talk about justice tonight. Justice. That tricky, elusive concept. You know, justice is like a vending machine. You go in hoping for something sweet, but sometimes you're just left with a handful of salty pretzels and disappointment. And much like the vending machine, the justice system will absolutely eat your dollar and leave you staring, wondering, what did I do wrong? But hey, that's what Night Court is here for. We give you the drama, the absurdity, and the justice that's usually reserved for daytime television, but juiced up for primetime. And if you thought tonight's cases were wild, well, I hope you're ready. Here, it's not just about crime and punishment. It's about laughing through the madness. Because if we didn't laugh, we'd cry, or, we'd move to Canada. So, sit back, grab a drink, and let's dive into the court cases that make you question humanity mostly, but also the legal system. Welcome to Night Court. Let's get started with the word on the street. All right, our first story tonight is pedal at your own peril. Ladies and gentlemen, let's be honest. Let's be honest. I've seen our demographics. Ladies, hold on to your kickstands. Japan has officially declared if you're on two wheels, it's time to put down the phone and keep both hands on the handlebars. Yes, under new rules introduced Friday, cyclists in Japan caught strolling, that'd be hard to do, caught scrolling, texting, or swiping while riding can now face up to 6 months in jail. No more posting mid-ride selfies or sending that running late text from the bike lane. You break the law, and it's off to the slammer for half a year or a cool 100,000 yen fine, or about $655, or as cyclists like to think, enough for 2 very, very nice bike helmets. So, why the crackdown? Well, it turns out, as the pandemic saw more people hopping on bicycles instead of packed trains, Japan's bike accident rates went pedal to the metal, climbing faster than a bike up Mount Fuji. Which, if you think about that, that's not entirely that fast. So that analogy... Can I get a rewrite? No? I'm talking to myself. Oh well. In either case, local media reports say the rise began in 2021. So authorities decided it was time to slap some regulations on these cycling Snapchatters. I froze. That's not good. Can everybody still hear me? Hello? I did ye old freezing. That's no good. Ein momento, por favor. That's not what I want. Well, that's a little less interesting, isn't it? Oh, well. What are you going to do? We got to roll with the punches, shall we? You can hear me. Okay, cool. But you couldn't hear me. Oh, Lady in Gray. All right, I'm going to try and flip back to it and see if I can flip back to it. Hey, okay, cool. Great. Love it. Anyways, the bikes, everybody's here. Except there is only so much a producer can do when it's my fault. All right. So the rise of cycling accidents began in 2021. So authorities decided it was time to slap some regulations on those cycling Snapchatters. But it's not just texting that's off limits now. Cyclists under the influence of alcohol could face up to 3 years in jail, or a whopping 2,000 yen fine, about just under $3,300, or enough to buy one very high-end DUI-proof bike. Japan wants to make it crystal clear. No more cycling while imbibing. It's like this. Get ready. Don't go cycling while tipsy. Please stick to the sober streets and lanes that you're used to. I know that sake looks really tasty, but bike and buzz could mean 6 months jail. Listen to me. What happened? I blacked out. Within mere hours of these new laws rolling out, Osaka authorities were already racking up offenders. Friday saw 5 violations, including 2 men caught riding their bikes while drunk. One of them even collided with another cyclist. Luckily, no one was injured, but it certainly set a wobbly tone for the new rules. Now consider this. Just think about it. You're booked in jail after having a hell of a night out and biking home because, what could go wrong? You're placed in a cell with a couple of guys. One says he shanked his friend over mahjong, and the other says he's doing life for killing someone after they jumped their turn in a game of Pokemon. Then they turn to you and ask, what are you in for? Sapporo and Schwinn? Now, if you're thinking, this is a bit extreme, isn't it? Consider this. Japan recorded over 72,000 bicycle accidents in 2023 alone, making up a fifth of all traffic accidents. That's 1 in 5 accidents caused by cyclists, many of whom were likely distracted by the Tide Pod trend or last night's ramen delivery options. And with 2024 seeing 17 serious injuries from cyclists using their phones, which is the highest since the data began in 2007, authorities are officially taking the training wheels off and saying enough. This isn't Japan's first move to make the roads safer for cyclists. Last year, they made it mandatory for cyclists to wear helmets. And in case you thought helmet laws were a gentle nudge towards safety, Japan's parliament recently passed a bill allowing police to slap fines on cyclists for traffic violations. So, the days of casual, carefree cycling in Japan, they're gone. Now, here's where Japan gets unique. Unlike in many countries, cycling on a sidewalk is legal. Yep, cyclists in Japan share pavement space with pedestrians, which sounds like the scene to a slapstick comedy, but is in fact daily life. So if you're visiting Japan, keep an eye out because you'll probably be dodging a grandma on her morning walk and a texting teenager on a bike at the same time. You're going to have to pick one. So there you have it. Japan's new motto for cyclists: if you're tipsy, texting, or just plain reckless, prepare to face the music. Or jail time. The next time you're tempted to check your YouTube stats on a bike, remember, a few likes aren't worth 6 months in the pokey. I feel like I directed that comment to myself. Oh well, anyways. Up next, Terry, if you're listening, cover Jasper's ears, because while it might have been too late for this goat, the owner ended up being able to cry into a stack of money. This story is part heartwarming, part horrifying, and entirely a uniquely Californian mess. In a tale that's got more drama than a soap opera, and more courtroom twists than the Depp Heard trial, a 9-year-old girl from Shasta County was just awarded $300,000 after her pet goat was seized by sheriff's deputies and, brace yourself, sent to slaughter. Yeah, somewhere between 4-H Club and farm life, this goat story takes a really, really dark turn. So here's how it went down. The girl's pet goat, a beloved fluffy farm friend that she had raised and bonded with, named Cedar, was a fixture at the local county fair. But as the saying goes, one does not simply wish to take a goat to a county fair in Shasta. You see, Cedar was originally part of a livestock auction where animals, like in a very sad reality TV show, are raised to be sold and eventually eaten. And this is the point where every vegetarian that's listening here says, see, that's what I'm talking about. That is, I don't need you to slam it in my face, okay? However, when the time came to say goodbye to Cedar, this young girl's heart did a U-turn. She decided she just couldn't part with him. So in an act of defiance only a 9-year-old can truly pull, she decided that Cedar would be pulled from the auction block and brought home. Cedar's safe, right? Right? If only. Enter Shasta County officials, who apparently felt that nothing says public service quite like going on a goat hunting mission. They argued that since Cedar had technically been sold, he belonged to the highest bidder, who probably wasn't exactly thrilled about this emotional attachment twist in their dinner plans. So, what did the sheriff's deputies do? They drove 500 miles to track down this wayward goat, which is an act of dedication that has left every stolen bike owner in California thinking, dude, where was the energy when my wheels went missing? The deputies managed to locate Cedar, and despite pleas from the girl's family and probably a fair amount of confused bleeding from Cedar himself, they took him, delivered him to his ultimate fate. Yep, Cedar the goat, friend to a child, met an untimely end at a butcher's hands. And that is when things would start to get messy. That's a poor choice of words. Really should have read this out ahead of time. The girl's family decided they weren't going to let this go without a fight. I mean, this isn't just a goat. It's a $300,000 goat. And in what can only be described as Cedar's revenge, the family took the matter to court. Excuse me. They argued that the seizure of Cedar violated the little girl's rights and that the deputy's goat retrieval mission was extreme, unnecessary, and utterly ridiculous. The judge agreed, awarding the family $300,000 in damages, making Cedar the most valuable goat since Tom Brady. Ew. I'm gonna wash my mouth out. After that one, wash my mouth out with mulled wine. Now, Shasta County officials are left to explain to taxpayers why they dropped a cool $300,000 over a goat that could have lived happily ever after in someone's backyard. If only someone had just let the kid keep her goat, which is a little bit redundant if you think about it. We'd all have been spared this wild legal saga and one very expensive court case. So what's the takeaway here? Sometimes the right thing to do is just to let the kid keep the goat. And if you're Shasta County, maybe next time, save the cross-state road trip for something a bit more pressing than a missing barnyard buddy. Good grief. All right, our final story, word on the street, is lights on, security off. Embrace yourself, Schneider Electric, the beloved... Such a weird analogy for an energy giant. The beloved multinational energy giant that keeps lights on and factories running just got hit by a cybersecurity incident on November 5th. The company responsible for making sure electrical grids don't explode and factories don't go full Skynet woke up to find hackers knocking on their virtual doors. Again. Because apparently even cyber criminals think industrial control systems are a little too efficient and just want to spice things up a bit. In a statement that screamed, "I am required to tell you this," Schneider confirmed the incident, but kept the details shrouded in mystery, saying they were still investigating the scope. Ah, yes. The good old corporate version of, I'm not crying, I just have something in my eye. If this is business as usual, as this statement seemed to imply, I'd hate to see something that was really an issue. The company assured everyone that their systems have remained operational, which is corporate speak for, if your lights flicker, it's totally not our fault. Probably. As of now, there's no confirmation about who's behind this attack or what they were after. Was it ransom money? Trade secrets? Maybe just someone's deranged passion for interrupting high-stakes systems? Whatever it is, Schneider says they're on it. Now, to those unfamiliar with Schneider Electric, like I was, let me explain. They're in charge of the stuff that keeps water pumping, electricity flowing, and industries humming. In short, they hold the keys to basically everything you don't want hackers to touch. And yet, hackers everywhere are apparently setting their crosshairs on any system that sounds like it might have a, quote, do not touch but red button in their office. Schneider claims it's cooperating with relevant authorities to get to the bottom of this. They haven't named names yet, but I'd bet my next paycheck, which is $0. So, yep, I bet it still works. Bet my next paycheck that every 3-letter agency with a badge and scowl is on this faster than you can say cybersecurity protocol. The FBI, CIA, NSA, and every cybersecurity expert in a 500-mile radius are likely swarming their systems right now, waving their digital flashlights and muttering, "Oh boy, here we go again." Here's what the ransom note said. We have successfully breached Schneider Electric's infrastructure, accessing their Atlassian Jira system. This breach has compromised critical data, including projects, issues, and plugins, along with over 400,000 rows of user data, totaling more than 40 gigabytes of compressed data. Schneider Electric, a leader in energy management and automation with annual revenue exceeding $40 billion, is now at risk of exposing sensitive customer and operational information. To secure the deletion of this data and prevent its public release, we require a payment of $125,000 in baguettes. Failure to meet this demand will result in the dissemination of the compromised information. Stating this breach will decrease the ransom by 50%. It's your choice, Olivier. Olivier is assumed to be Olivier Bloom, who on Monday was announced as Schneider's new CEO. And by the way, I didn't misread that. The hackers demanded $125,000 in baguettes. I guess if they don't get it, the servers are toast. It seems like the company thinks this is a half-baked idea, and even if the company offered cash, the hackers would respond with, "No dough, no deal." Industry insiders say this incident underscores just how vulnerable critical infrastructure really is. One expert commented, "Schneider is just the latest and certainly won't be the last." Translation: if your job involves protecting a server connected to literally anything important, don't make plans for the weekend. Did I freeze again? Did I freeze again? I sure did. Why? Why? Hold on. So embarrassing. Good grief, JT. I'm just going to go with this for now. We're going to continue on. So it's not going to be the last. And that's the translation of that is if your job involves protecting a server connected to literally anything, don't make plans for the weekend. In the meantime, Schneider has promised to provide updates and tips for customers who might be feeling a bit, shall we say, nervous. Tips like reboot your system every 5 minutes, consider a new line of work, or the ever reliable, "We're so sorry." So it's the moral of the story. Well, if you're a hacker, this is clearly your moment to shine. And if you're Schneider Electric, well, you might want to invest in some stronger passwords. Maybe call your IT guy back from lunch and keep the flashlight ready. Because in 2024, we've officially learned that no one is safe, not even the company in charge of keeping everyone else safe. But I suppose we should be happy that they intend to leave no crumb unturned. Oh, goodness gracious. And I'm back. That's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to flip back and forth. I froze again. I can't do this. This is wild. This is unfortunate. I don't know what's going on. Whatever. Oh, my goodness gracious. Well, you know what? Let's get into a brand new segment that we are calling Fast and Felonious.
We're in pursuit. We're in pursuit.
All right. Nicholas Wayne Hamlett. On October 18th, 2024, Polk County, Tennessee, authorities received a 911 distress call. A man reported that he had fallen off a cliff while running from a bear. Knowing this rural Tennessee county, which borders North Carolina, is in the heart of Appalachia, makes this scenario entirely possible. Like a scene out of Deliverance, but with more murder and less banjos. The man told authorities he was injured and, quote, halfway in the water before the call disconnected. The Polk County dispatchers pinged the call and learned the man was actually in nearby Monroe County. So those authorities were alerted. Monroe County authorities, this is very difficult. JT, fix your camera that you didn't plan on using tonight. Stay there. Sit, stay. Monroe County authorities arrived on the scene at the Charles Hall Bridge area of Cherahalla Skyway in Tellico Plains to search for an injured hiker, only to find a man's body instead. Immediately, it was noticed that the man's injuries were not consistent with a bear attack, nor with a fall from a cliff. A card found in the man's pocket named the deceased as Daren Christopher Andrade. The origin of the man's injuries was still in question, but at least authorities had an identification of the deceased. Or so they thought at the time. The body was taken to the Knox County Regional Forensic Center, and the cause of death turned out to be blunt force trauma to the head. And the last time I checked, bears have a hard time holding hammers and or any bludgeoning instruments. Authorities quickly learned that the man was not, in fact, Daren Andrade, and that the identification turned out to be a stolen identity used historically by Nicholas Wayne Hamlett. Seen here looking like he's the type of guy who's got an entire drawer dedicated to ketchup packets and soy sauce from takeout orders, just in case. And a convicted felon, too, let's just add to it, who's wanted for a parole violation in Alabama. It should be noted that the actual victim of the identity theft, Daren Andrade, is alive per authorities. Authorities discovered the deceased man was actually 34-year-old Stephen Douglas Lloyd of Knoxville, Tennessee, which is about 90 minutes north of Tellico Plains. Lloyd had been a troubled man, known to leave home and live on the streets. Lloyd was a foster child who had been adopted and raised by a loving family and had been diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder. Now, I briefly took a look into this because I hadn't heard about it before, and the Mayo Clinic describes it as a rare but serious condition in which an infant or young child doesn't establish healthy attachments with parents or caregivers. Reactive attachment disorder may develop if the child's basic needs for comfort, affection, and nurturing aren't met with loving, caring, stable attachments with others, and the stable attachments with others are not established. Not to add more stress to those of us raising kids. Ugh. Signs and symptoms of RAD include unexplained withdrawal, fear, sadness, or irritability, not seeking comfort or showing no response when comfort is given, sad and listless appearance, failure to smile, watching others closely but not engaging in social interaction, failure to reach out when picked up, no interest in playing peekaboo or other interactive games, behavioral problems, and failing to seek support or assistance. Now, despite his mental health issues, he had still remained in touch with his family. The Monroe County Sheriff reported, and they were shocked to learn their beloved son had been murdered by someone Stephen trusted. Officials said Nicholas Wayne Hamlett managed to befriend Lloyd. then lured him into a wooded area where Hamlett allegedly took his life and identity, but left Lloyd with Hamlett's most recent fake ID. It was determined that Hamlett was the man who placed the first 911 distress call before fleeing with his ill-gotten gain of a new identity, a huge target on his back, and a nationwide search with authorities on his heels. Nothing like dialing emergency services and saying, "Help! I'm running away from me!" I'm taking this opportunity to try to go back to camera number one. Camera number one, camera number two, camera number one, camera number two. Let's see how long this time lasts. In summary, Stephen Lloyd, murder victim, became Brandon Andrade, who was in reality alleged murderer Nicholas Hamlett with a stolen identity, so that Hamlett could become Lloyd and live an entirely new life without any hindrance. The fact that they have similar facial features, as well as Lloyd's lifestyle on the streets, are probably why Hamlett chose Lloyd as his mark. As mentioned before, this was not the first offense by Nicholas Wayne Hamlett. He has a history of kidnapping victims with further illegal acts in mind. Hamlett's wanted out of Alabama for a parole violation in connection to several charges, including 2 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of second-degree forgery, and 1 count of first-degree kidnapping, and a partridge in a pear tree. You don't want to know where ultimately the partridge ended up. Sheriff Bill Franklin of Elmore County, Alabama, shared that Hamlett pleaded guilty to attempted murder and assault in 2011. He is currently on parole for these charges. Franklin said on June 30th, 2009, a police officer responded to a call where a man said another one tried to overpower him. When police arrived at Pecan Grove Road, I'm an equal opportunity pronunciator, they found an open grave had been dug. Franklin said that investigators also found 2 knives, a bat, a shovel, and bleach. According to Franklin, the victim said Hamlett called using the name Joshua Jones so he could get some insurance. However, when the victim arrived, Hamlett attempted to overpower him. Hamlett then held the victim at gunpoint and led him into the woods. Franklin said the victim then overpowered Hamlett and knocked him out. He remained unconscious until police arrived. After pleading guilty to reduced charges, there are some charges that just should not be. Okay. Hamlett was sentenced to 20 years in prison and was paroled in July of 2016, according to court records. At best, it appears he served around 7 years of his 20-year sentence if his time served began with the year of the crime, 2009. Would Lloyd still be alive if Hamlett served his entire sentence, even at 85% per current Alabama sentencing requirements? Where is the truth in sentencing laws? Reduced attempted murder is like attempting to reduce arson by calling it a barbecue gone wrong. The U.S. Marshals who are leading the search for Hamlett and have been joined by the FBI said that Hamlett had used the Brandon Andrade stolen identity in the past. The search for the fugitive, who has ties all over the country in Alabama, Tennessee, Montana, Kentucky, Florida, and even Alaska, well, that search is still ongoing. The U.S. Marshals have issued a $5,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. For that price, he's basically worth a Groupon and maybe last night's popcorn from the theater. So you might need to boost that a bit. He was last spotted camping outside of the town of Chapin, South Carolina, population 1,900, on October 31st, 2024. After this confirmed sighting at the high school, he fled before he could be detained. Searches with helicopters and dogs were unsuccessful. There were other unconfirmed sightings in the area, but there have been no other confirmed sightings. It is believed that he has family in the area of Chapin. So could he be another Eric Rudolph, the Olympic bomber who lived in hiding in the mountains for years before being apprehended? Sure. I mean, if he's okay with living off squirrel stew and pretending Netflix doesn't exist, because nothing says master criminal like spending a decade arguing with a raccoon over your last can of beans. Joseph Carrico, a special agent for the FBI, said about Hamlett, wanted to speak directly to Hamlett. He said, "Nick, let's end this peacefully. Turn yourself in, have your day in court. The long arm of the law has a long and huge reach, and we will find you." He then said, "See, Nick, isn't it nice for us to plan your days? Once you turn yourself in, we'll control your days, hours, and minutes." He didn't say the last part. I added that. Authorities also expressed that anyone aiding Hamlett or who knows where Hamlett can be found and isn't reporting that to police will be subject to criminal charges. So if that $5,000 wasn't enough to have you tell them, just know that could be coming down the pike. Hamlett is considered armed and dangerous. He is described as 5'7" and weighing around 170 pounds with brown hair and blue eyes. And honestly, he sounds an awful lot like the dude is basically a starter pack for blending into any crowd. Like, he's got that classic guy who might help you at Home Depot, but also might just be browsing for a new drill look. He may even be using his old Brandon Andrade false identity as he moves around. So, keep an eye out and be careful. That's enough of that. Let's get into the brief. All right, everybody. We are going to set the scene for you. It is a crisp October morning in Gallatin County, Montana. Wildlife abounds. The air is fresh. And a man is about to embark on what he believes will be a quiet, peaceful camping trip in the great outdoors. But what starts as a routine call, a possible bear attack, no less, quickly spirals into something more sinister. This is a story of bizarre clues, strange choices, and a chain of events that ultimately leads to one of the strangest criminal cases to hit this quiet corner of the state. On October 12th, 2024, at approximately 10:07 a.m., the Gallatin County Dispatch Center received an unusual call, a bear attack. A man reported that his girlfriend had found another man deceased in his tent, sparking a swift response from law enforcement, wildlife officers, fire, medical personnel, Jack Hanna, Steve Irwin. Oh, too soon. Too soon, JT. But upon arriving, it was clear this wasn't your typical Yogi Bear situation. As detectives surveyed the scene, it became clear that this was far from a nature-related incident. The deceased, identified as Dustin Kearsum, lay in a canvas tent surrounded by telltale signs of human confrontation. Blood around the body, an empty axe sheath, and 2 shot glasses with lime slices perched atop stacked totes. And if you've ever been camping, you know shot glasses are typically more of a celebratory spirit than a potential witness. Also spotted 3 cans of Coors Light and a very conspicuous absence of camping equipment, including a cooler, a Ruger 44 Magnum revolver, a shotgun, and the axe, all of which, according to his friends and the victim's girlfriend, had been packed. Dustin's girlfriend revealed that he had gone to the campsite alone to set up and planned to return to pick her up the next day. But when he didn't show, she headed out with a friend and, unfortunately and tragically, discovered his body. While the missing items could have been overlooked, the autopsy left no doubt. This was not a case of bad luck bear, but it was a homicide. The injuries were extensive and consistent with assault using an axe, a screwdriver, and firewood, tools that generally belong at a campsite for chopping wood or fixing a lantern, not for assault. Then things took an intriguing turn. On October 17th, 2 of the victim's coworkers discovered 2 discarded phones near a creek about 2.5 miles from the campsite. 5 days later, the Montana State Crime Lab reported that DNA found on one of the beer cans in the tent was a partial match to 41-year-old Daren Christopher Abbey and his incarcerated brother. And with a name in hand, detectives had their suspect. Ooh, boy. Somebody book him. I don't know. Somebody book him on something. Somebody book me on the not being frozen anymore, too. Oh, well. All right. Abbey was apprehended by Butte police on October 26th for a probation violation, and during a Mirandized interview on October 29th, he admitted to killing the victim. In a somewhat audacious twist, he claimed self-defense, recounting a gruesome attack that involved hitting the victim with firewood. Yeah, you're not kidding. It sure is. Yep. Just like I'm on right now. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's pissed off I didn't give him any. For poison ivy, I'm not lifting. Does this look like I lift? It's smaller than like a paper straw that nobody likes. What up, Hades? So he claimed self-defense, recounting a gruesome attack that involved hitting the victim with firewood, stabbing him in the neck with a screwdriver, and then striking him with the blunt side of an axe. Yet, notably, the defendant had no defensive injuries, which one might expect in a self-defense situation. Abbey also admitted he removed multiple items from the scene, including 2 coolers, the revolver, the shotgun, and an ammo sleeve, all of which he claimed he took because they bore his fingerprints. He said he'd washed the axe and screwdriver in a nearby creek and discarded the victim's phones to erase his trail. Adding to the flair, Abbey returned to the scene to retrieve his forgotten hat, and in that return visit, helped himself to a pair of binoculars and a headlamp from the victim's trunk. Clothes and shoes that were worn during the crime were washed and burned. All evidence indicated this was not only a homicide, but was also tampering with a scene to throw investigators off track. Abbey is now held on charges of deliberate homicide and tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. Abbey is currently being held on $1.5 million bail, and his story now joins the annals of crime cases that remind us the truth is stranger and it's much darker than fiction. Let's hop into my favorite names to say. Nima Momeni. That sure gave me a trip up last week. That's for sure. That's for darn sure. What is happening? Oh my gosh. What is it? Why? Why, friends? Frozen again. All right, stop messing with it. I'm talking to myself. Stop messing with it. All right, let's talk about Nima Momeni. In California v. Nima Momeni, the Silicon Valley tech world is gripped by the trial of Momeni, a tech consultant charged with the murder of Cash App founder Bob Lee. On April 4th, 2023, Lee was found fatally stabbed in San Francisco's East Cut neighborhood. Within days, police arrested Momeni, an acquaintance of Lee and the brother of Khazar Momeni, who had a close, allegedly platonic relationship with Lee. Prosecutors argue that Momeni, angered by concerns about his sister's relationship with Lee, drove Lee to a secluded location and stabbed him 3 times, including a fatal wound to the heart. The defense, however, claims Momeni acted in self-defense, saying Lee had been using drugs and initiated the confrontation. Khazar Momeni's testimony has been central, as she described feeling unsafe on the night of Lee's death and suggested her brother acted out of concern for her. The prosecution, however, sees her narrative as a strategic attempt to shift responsibility. Lee's loved ones have criticized the defense for highlighting Lee's drug use, with his ex-wife Krista Lee urging the court to focus on his achievements rather than his final moments. This week, Sergeant David Goff took the stand. He looks like a manager for WWE. Took the stand, giving his account of tailing Momeni in a police stakeout. He described spotting Momeni at a sandwich shop and then meeting up with private investigator Brian Headley. Now, let's be clear. This wasn't your typical lunch and catch up with a friend. Goff described seeing Momeni in a heated conversation. He was making stabbing motions to Headley's left side and then a tossing gesture as if he'd had a little too much practice with imaginary weapons. Now, most of you would assume he was reacting maybe his favorite movie scene. But Goff was ready to catch some DNA evidence. He even tried to collect a cigarette butt by waiting for Momeni to finish smoking. Unfortunately, Momeni smoked that cigarette down to the filter like he was in an anti-littering PSA. A tense moment for Goff and for the environment. The prosecution finally wrapped its case, and all eyes turned to Momeni, who reportedly couldn't wait to take the stand and share his side of the story. His defense team seems a bit wary, and it makes sense. This is the equivalent of handing the microphone to the person who's had a few too many at karaoke. But Momeni insists he wants to clear up the picture of himself, probably one brushstroke at a time. Lee's brother Tim wasn't buying it. He pointed out that Momeni's DNA was found on the knife handle while Lee's DNA was on the blade. Self-defense? Really? If that's self-defense, then I'm a 5-star chef because I made a grilled cheese once. The defense kicked off by calling in DNA expert Greg that guy. Marty, we're going back to the future. He is one. This guy minus beard plus stubble equals the scientist who's kept underground far too long in Independence Day. His name's Greg Greg H., who argued the SFPD should have tested the knife handle for fingerprints before DNA. Basically, he's saying that the police were as careful with the evidence as your roommate is with the dishes. You know, half the job's done, call it a day. He dropped some scientific terms like false inclusion and false exclusion, which is, well, it really just forensic speak for, are we sure they knew what they were doing? The defense then brought in Aranza Villegas, a friend of Momeni's sister, Kazar. Seen here looking very surprised at whatever is going on to the left of her. Both women told the jury they'd been given some dodgy drugs from Lee's alleged dealer, making them feel sick. The defense is hoping this testimony makes Momeni, seen here looking as if he's walking away from an explosion that doesn't exist, look like a protective sibling. But they'll have to tread lightly. Nobody wants the jury thinking, oh, he's that protective, brother. Family gatherings must be like Game of Thrones. The trial resumes on Tuesday, and if Momeni does take the stand, he will finally get to share his side of the story, or as Sarah Boone calls it, the capital T truth. Whether that story sounds like self-defense or a new episode of CSI Startup Edition, well, that's anybody's guess. The case's outcome hinges on whether the jury believes Momeni acted with intent or self-defense. Momeni, if convicted, faces up to 26 years to life for first-degree murder. Night Court, of course, will keep you updated as the trial continues. And now, for the moment you've all been waiting for, you've fat fingered the phone. I'm fat fingering the camera at this point, apparently. Let's give this another shot. All right, we're going to move right on into the Richard Allen trial. Because why not? Right? All right. Week 4 of the Richard Allen trial started with the defense calling Dr. Polly Westcott, a neuropsychologist hired by the defense in May of 2023 to assess Allen's mental, emotional, and physical decline. While he was in the Westville prison. She met with Allen at Westville in August of 2023 and performed her assessment over 2 days. Westcott came to 6 conclusions in her assessment. Allen had a long history of mental health issues. Allen was not faking or exaggerating his symptoms. Allen is slower to understand, process, and respond to things. Allen experienced a complete mental health decrease in Westville. Allen has major depressive disorder and slipped into psychosis due to stress. Allen's brain chemistry was changed while in prison due to no contact with wife and family and sensory deprivation during solitary confinement. That just sounds like a cocktail for just a lost mind, to be honest. Next, the jury were shown some more videos from Allen's cell and camcorder videos. These videos were shown only to the jury, so it's uncertain what they contained, though it is believed that the camcorder videos showed Allen being tased, showering, eating feces, receiving an x-ray, and interacting with his nurse. Max Baker, who was on the stand at the time, said he picked the videos he did because they showed Rick's life in prison. Next on the stand was Jamie Jones, Richard Allen's half-sister. Last week, we learned that Allen, quote, confessed to molesting his sister when they were younger. However, she testified that he did not ever molest her or touch her inappropriately. When asked if she would ever lie for him, she replied, no. The defense team then called Allen's daughter, Brittany Zampanetta. Zapanta. I don't know why I got the extra Etta in there. Watching too many mafia movies. His daughter also refuted any claims that her father had molested her. The prosecution asked her, did you and your father go on the Manon High Bridge? She said she went to the bridge with him and only crossed it once or twice. The last witness of the day was Brad Weber, the white van guy from the previous week. It's reported that he looked extremely disheveled when he took the stand. Defense attorney Andrew Baldwin handed him a transcript from an FBI interview Weber did in February of 2017 that says Weber went on a 3-day trip to Arizona and got back the Sunday before the girls died. He was then asked about his ATM business. Weber said that he had 20 machines at one point and has about 15 now. He tells the jury that he tended to his ATMs daily and that he would use his black Subaru to drive to service his ATMs, which sounds a little dirty. That's not in the script, but it still sounds like it. He also said, the only time I used my van was when I was pulling a trailer. On the day of the murders, he said he went straight home from his other job at the Subaru plant. The jury had some questions for Mr. Weber, such as, do you know if the ATMs would have photo or video of servicing? Weber says not the actual ATMs, but some of the locations. How far in advance would you have to order cash for ATMs? He said, getting cash isn't a problem, but a week in advance. What is the process to clock out of work? He replies, turnstile. What driveway do you use at home? Weber says, the driveway under the Manon High Bridge. Do you drive under the bridge? Would you have taken that route on February 13th, 2017? Yes. Do you typically go home before servicing your ATMs? No. Moving on into day 16, Tuesday. Tuesday morning began with testimony from Betsy Blair, a witness who told police she saw Bridge Guy. She testified that she saw one car in the CPS lot and that it had been backed into a parking spot and its front was pointing toward the county road. She also said the car was not a bright color like red or yellow. Defense attorney Baldwin handed her a statement she made on April 2nd, 2019, to which she said the car could not have been black. Blair said she only saw the side of the car, though, and couldn't tell if it was a hatchback, adding that she even drew the profile of the car for the police. Prosecutor Stacy Diener said she told Blair that a similar vehicle had been seen around the same time, parked off the road, and asked her if that changed her recollection at all. But Blair said that she felt certain about the car she saw. Next on the stand was Dr. Stuart Gracian, who is... he looks like... This picture makes him look like he is about to give the drive-thru attendant at Wendy's just the what for. I said a Frosty. I don't care if your machine's broken. You're not McDonald's. It should be working. Anyways, he's on the faculty at the Harvard University School of Medicine for the last 25 years. He has a special interest in what solitary confinement does to someone's mental health and has evaluated several hundred people in those conditions. Of course, now that I just said that, sounds like an interesting study. He was given all videos, notes, reports, records, and phone calls made by Allen from November 2022 to February 2024. Defense attorney Bradley Rosie asked Gracian about solitary confinement in a clinical professional cell. Gracian said that when a person is confined to a small cell, there's limited availability for mental stimulus and that it's toxic for a mental state and people cannot function. In the worst case, people can become psychotic. Gracian also stated that the United Nations considers anything more than 15 days in solitary confinement torture. So Delphi approached the stand. I assume. Gracian testified that false memory is a big component in Allen's evaluation. He said false memories begin looking like memories over time. It's like a game of telephone in your brain and starts with, I think I saw. A real memory is extremely perceptual when compared to a fake memory, adding that it was always about the conditions when it came to solitary confinement and protective custody. The jury asked Gracian a few questions. Do you believe psychotic behavior can go back to normal after being removed from solitary confinement? Yes. Do you believe a completely normal person can become psychotic after being in solitary confinement for more than 6 months to a year? Yes, I have seen it happen. The defense then called Dr. Eric Warren to the stand, who owns SEP Forensic Consultants, which helps with tool mark identification and crime scene reconstruction. He said he was asked to review conclusions made by Melissa Oberg, who testified towards the beginning of the trial about the bullet found by Abby and Libby's bodies and Richard Allen's gun. He then explained what class, subclass, and individual characteristics are when it comes to bullets. Class is general, like the make of a car. Subclass is in between, larger than individual, and individual would be fine details, like hair scratches. He mentioned that labs have been shut down over subclass and individual characteristics. According to Warren, it isn't appropriate to compare a fired cartridge to a cycled cartridge. Apples to apples is what Warren said he would expect, not apples to oranges. He confirmed to the jury that Oberg used a fired round to compare the cycled round to, which he said wasn't right, as it isn't repeatable and reproducible. James Luttrell then began his cross-examination, asking if Warren was only looking at the report and photos and not physical evidence, and if that would impact his ability to draw conclusions, but Warren disagreed. He said Oberg didn't examine the actual extractor in the gun to determine if there were possible or potential subclass characteristics. Defense attorney Rosie then showed Warren a picture of triangular marks on the cartridge, which are ejector marks. He said those were hallmark of subclass characteristics. Luttrell objected to Rosie mentioning a lab that had been shut down over subclass characteristics, but Gall sustained. The two went back and forth on if most labs use CMS, which is an objective identification process. Warren said some labs do not, but he wouldn't classify it as most, but said he would have said there was an insufficient agreement in the cartridges. The defense then calls Stacy Eldridge, who is an expert in computer information management. She worked for the FBI for nearly 10 years as a forensic examiner and later as a senior examiner. She reviewed the October 2017 cell phone extraction as well as the Celebrite report, as well as the report and deposition from Chris Cecil. Eldridge says that the Indiana State Police had the capacity in early 2017 to do a full extraction of Libby's phone, but only did it in October of that year. She said this caused issues and the loss of a specific piece of data called the current power log. The log only stays saved in between a phone being turned all the way off and on. She said her priority was figuring out what was going on with the phone at 4:34 a.m. on February 14th, 2017, to make the phone receive multiple text messages. She testified that she generally agrees with the state experts' examination of the timeline of Libby's phone, but there are things she does not agree with, such as some of the times, some of the texts, calls, and FaceTimes that were delivered between February 13th and 14th. Eldridge said there were times on the 13th and the 14th that the phone was not connected to a cell tower. And the last time it connected to the 13th was at 5:45 p.m. and reconnected at 4:33 a.m. on the 14th. The phone was not using data in between those times. Cecil's report said there were messages coming through during that time frame. Eldridge says there is evidence that the phone did not have messages delivered in between those times. Eldridge said that some of those messages did have timestamps in between the two times, but they weren't delivered. And the voice messages between those two times were not delivered until February 17th. Eldridge said that she now knows that at 5:45 p.m. on February 13th to 10:32 p.m. that night, the phone had wired headphones plugged in. She demonstrated headphones being plugged into an iPhone 6S. She states it could have been an auxiliary cord for a car that was plugged into the phone. I cannot think of any explanation that does not involve humans, she told the jury. She also said that right before the headphones were plugged in, there was an incoming call and that the headphones would have stopped that call. The jury had some questions for Eldridge. Did you ever write your own timeline? Eldridge said, no, not enough time. Could any of this be related to Libby's iPad? She said they were not synced. She said they were not synced. Would water impact movement? She said no, that water would not impact the port. The defense then brings on Chris Cecil, who had previously testified for the prosecution. Defense attorney Jennifer Auger asks him what an audio output start means. He says he does not know. Cecil says he doesn't have the education to know why a cell phone would or wouldn't connect to a tower. During cross-examination, Cecil says he Googled the water question asked by the jury to Eldridge. Sir, you should not have a cell phone in the courtroom. And he said a Google search said that a phone could register water or dirt in the headphone port as having headphones plugged in. You Google... Okay. You're not helping your team there, buddy. During redirect, Jennifer Auger asked Cecil, do you normally Google search when conducting research in a criminal investigation? Cecil said, not normally, no. She then asks him, you normally look at peer-reviewed articles, right? Cecil says that's correct. Auger finishes by asking, you and the state have had 7.5 years to research this? That's correct. Moving in to day 17, Wednesday. On Wednesday morning, after 6 days of calling forward over 20 witnesses, the defense rested. The prosecution then recalled Dr. John Martin, a licensed psychiatrist for Westville Prison. He testified that he saw Alan in April of 2023 after he got a phone call that prompted him to visit Alan unplanned. He said he saw Alan lying naked on a cell mattress with feces smeared on his body. Martin told the prison staff that he needed to see Alan, and they practically dragged him to a shower cell and gave him a gown. Martin said it was at that point he decided Alan was psychotic, and that in order to treat Alan's psychosis, he had put him on antipsychotic medication. He wanted to put Alan on Haldol, an antipsychotic drug commonly used to treat schizophrenia. Haldol, not a sponsor of Night Court. Alan's mental state was such that he could not consent to treatment. And in order to give him Haldol injections without consent, Martin called Dr. Hayes, a regional psychologist, with his contractor, and asked for an emergency meeting with 3 psychologists. Martin said all 3 psychologists agreed Alan was psychotic, and he proceeded with the first treatment on April 14th of 2023. He testified that he gave Alan 5 milligrams of short-acting Haldol to make sure Alan didn't have a reaction. After that, Alan was injected with a 15 milligram dose of long-acting Haldol, one every 4 weeks, with the first dose administered on April 18th, 2023. Martin said he saw Alan 1 week later and that Alan was still psychotic, but there was some improvement. He described improvement as there being no evidence of smearing feces and that Alan would recognize him but didn't know the date. So the bar was set. He said that he believed April 13th was the height of Alan's psychosis. On June 20th, Alan had gone 7 weeks without showing signs of psychosis, and Martin decided to stop the Haldol injections. Martin said Alan told him that day, "I would like to apologize to the families of my victims." He told the jury Alan was not psychotic at the time of the statement. Well, you just turn it on and off. Defense attorney Rosie then began his cross-examination of Dr. John Martin. Rosie tells the jury that Dr. Martin does not have a traditional bachelor's degree from an American university and that he was terminated from a position in Florida. He also said that Martin was involved with lawsuits with a person that was in solitary confinement. Martin said solitary can cause or exaggerate mental illness and that Alan could possibly move in and out of psychosis. He testified that on April 13th, 2023, Alan was very psychotic. He said he agreed that Alan suffered from major depressive disorder and that him believing he was unfairly incarcerated could make that depression worse. No shit, Sherlock. Sorry. Real responses. Martin said he has treated a pretrial detainee in prison that had no criminal history before. But Rosie then shows Martin his previous deposition, and Martin agrees that he earlier said he had not treated a pretrial detainee in a prison before. Rosie then begins to play the video from June 20th, 2023, in which Alan said he wanted to apologize to the families. Martin said his conversation with Alan on that day was an interview and that he was, quote, in control of his faculties, he says. And he says that Alan's statement about apologizing to the families was spontaneous. Martin says he does not remember if the interaction was recorded. He also tells the jury he does not know why Alan's actions on June 20th seem different than what he had recorded, but that he does not question his own records. The jury had some questions. Oh, I bet they did. Somebody get the basket. Did the oral Haldol continue after June 20th, 2023? Yes. Based on the video, could this presentation be consistent with faking? No. Is it possible for Alan to slip in and out of psychosis in a 24-hour period? Yes. After Martin got off the stand, the prosecution rested again. On Thursday, day 18, closing arguments began on Thursday with prosecutor Nick McLeland reminding the jury of the lasting impact of February 13th, 2017. A day forever etched in the minds of Delphi, Indiana. He emphasized that the state has met its burden of proof, asserting that Richard Allen, whom they call Bridge Guy, is responsible for the murders of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. McLeland presented a sequence of evidence and witness testimonies, building a detailed timeline and making the case that Allen, through his actions and confessions, is unmistakably connected to the crime. McLeland began by revisiting the events of that day, displaying a photo from Libby's Snapchat taken as she and Abby were on their way to the bridge, capturing the last moments before the girls' fateful encounter. He shared the heartbreaking narrative of the search for Libby and Abby, explaining how the girls' families desperately looked for them. McLeland described how Brad Weber, a nearby neighbor, allowed the family to search his property through his home itself, or though his home itself wasn't inspected at the time. He reviewed witness accounts from people who saw Bridge Guy on or near the bridge that day. I'm convinced, I've said this before, I'm convinced Bridge Guy is Sasquatch. It's just permanently blurry. Just permanently blurry. It doesn't matter when you catch him or how focused your camera is. He himself is blurry. These accounts included Betsy Blair, who saw Libby and Abby on the bridge, and Sarah Carbaugh, who described seeing a man she believed to be Bridge Guy in a muddy and bloody state. McClelland walked the jury through the discovery of the crime scene where the bodies of Libby and Abbey were found. He showed the jury photos of the girls' clothing in Deer Creek and detailed the efforts by law enforcement to secure and analyze the area. Moving to specific evidence, he discussed how officers in Carroll County typically carry 9mm handguns, contrasting this with a .40 caliber cartridge found at the crime scene. He urged the jury to keep this detail in mind for later. Foreshadowing. McClelland then reviewed what investigators found at the crime scene. Libby's phone was discovered under Abby's shoe, which lay beneath Abby's body, and it contained a video from February 13th, 2017, captured at 2:13 p.m. The video showed the girls being forced down the hill by a man identified as Sasquatch, bridge guy, whom McClelland claimed was Allen. McClelland argued that bridge guy coerced the girls down the hill with a firearm, and in a chilling detail, he said Libby mentioned in the video, "That be a gun." He showed the jury an enhanced version of the video, to reinforce its importance. Next, McClelland covered the investigation's timeline and the findings from forensic expert Chris Cecil, who retrieved health and GPS data on Libby's phone, probably by searching Google. This data pinpointed the girls' movements until 2:32 p.m., when no further activity was recorded. McClelland also introduced witness Brianne Wilbur, who arrived at Freedom Bridge at 12:25 p.m. and walked to the High Bridge, taking a photo at 1:26 p.m. She reportedly encountered Bridge Guy on her way back to Freedom Bridge. McClelland recounted how Betsy Blair's vehicle was seen on surveillance footage from a nearby farm store, the Hoosier Harvest Store, and how the camera also recorded Kelsey German's car after she dropped off the girls. Blair saw a man on the bridge as she passed Libby and Abbey. This account corroborated the timeline leading up to the video Libby recorded of Bridge Guy at 2:13 p.m. Carbaugh later drove past the Hoosier Harvest Store camera at 3:56 p.m. and described the man she saw as muddy and bloody. Turning to 2022, McClelland explained how a new lead reignited the investigation. Kathy Shank, a state investigator, rediscovered a lead sheet identifying Richard Allen, which she brought to the attention of Detective Tony Liggett. Conservation Officer Dan Doolin then retrieved a photo of Allen from the BMV. Yes. Which became crucial in, is it DMV? BMV? I don't know. Let's call the whole thing off. Became crucial in confirming his identity as Bridge Guy. Allen's black 2016 Ford Focus was the only one of its kind registered in Carroll County at the time. And video from the Hoosier Harvest Store showed the car passing by around 1:17 p.m. on February 13th, 2017. McClelland reviewed how former Sheriff Steve Mullen called Allen in for questioning on October 13th, 2022. Allen allegedly confirmed he wore clothes similar to those seen on Bridge Guy. During the interview, Allen grew visibly agitated and changed his account of when he was at the bridge. McClelland displayed photos of Allen's Ford Focus and a blue Carhartt jacket, both recovered from Allen's home. Additionally, they found a .40 caliber Sig Sauer handgun and cartridges of the same brand and caliber as the cartridge found at the crime scene. In his presentation, McClelland labeled the items found as a Bridge Guy starter kit, underscoring the significance of the evidence. Why do I feel like he winked at the jury when he did that? Investigators also discovered a, quote, memories box containing another .40 caliber cartridge, though they were unable to locate the phone Allen used in 2017. He shared with the jury a troubling internet search Allen had conducted in April of 2022. Should I die now? Shortly after looking up news about the Delphi case. Ballistics expert Melissa Oberg linked the cartridge found at the crime scene to Allen's gun. McClelland noted that Allen admitted he had not loaned his firearm, clothes, one of those days, or ammunition to anyone. McClelland emphasized there is no explanation for how this bullet ended up there. He also described the mental and emotional manipulation Allen allegedly exerted over his wife Kathy when she was questioned, and Allen's confessions in prison calls to family members. In one call, Allen admitted, "I killed Abby and Libby," to which his wife responded, "No, you didn't, dear. They're screwing with you." Allen also wrote a confession letter to the prison warden and told Dr. Walla, a mental health professional, that his actions were sexual in nature. McLeland played recorded calls of Allen admitting guilt, underscoring that Allen only recanted his statements after legal counsel intervened. McLeland continued by reading additional confessions made by Allen in 2023, as well as his detailed account of seeing a specific white van nearby on the day of the murders. Officer Brian Harshman verified this detail, confirming that the van belonged to Brad Weber, who did drive it that day. This detail was one only the killer would know, McLeland pointed out, indicating Allen's unique knowledge of the crime scene and events. Finally, McLeland reviewed the charges against Allen, including felony murder for the deaths of Libby and Abby. As he concluded his argument, McLeland emphasized the significance of the evidence, pointing out the three main pillars: Bridge Guy's identity, the bullet, and Allen's confessions. He showed the Snapchat photo from Kelsey German's car once more, and reminding the jury of Libby's bravery in capturing the video of Bridge Guy. In a somber conclusion, McLeland reflected on the brutal nature of the crime. He described Libby's final moments, the struggles she endured, and the pause in her health data, signaling the loss of life. He asserted that Allen lived among the community without knowing he had left critical evidence, a cartridge, at the scene. Wrapping up, McLeland stated that the pieces now fit together, and he urged the jury to find Allen guilty, holding him accountable for stealing the youth and life from Libby and Abby. In his closing argument, defense attorney Whiplash, we're moving on to the defense, Brad Rosie, made a case for Richard Allen's innocence, and he did this by framing the prosecution's evidence as flawed, mishandled, and incomplete. Rosie contended that the state had failed to establish a reliable, consistent case against Allen. I went back to being frozen. I look demonic. I look so demonic. Rosie contended that the state had failed to establish a reliable, consistent case against Allen and focused instead on four primary themes that he believed dismantled the prosecution's case: a broken timeline, botched ballistics, false confessions, and weak digital forensics. Rosie began by questioning the timeline the state had put forward, suggesting that it was unreliable and incomplete. According to Rosie, the prosecution had omitted key details and disregarded evidence that did not fit their theory. He emphasized that witness testimonies were inconsistent and should be scrutinized. For instance, he referred to Sarah Carbaugh's testimony where she claimed to have seen a man muddy and bloody. Rosie argued that Carbaugh had confused muddy. Excuse me, sorry. Just apparently my camera and myself. Who knew? Rosie argued that Carbaugh had confused muddy with bloody, and he urged the jury to consider her account as credible dubiosity, a legal term suggesting that the testimony was unreliable. He pointed out that it's the jury's right to discredit or disregard testimony that lacks consistency. Rosie also highlighted the testimony of Brad Heath, who reported seeing an unusual man on the day of the crime. However, he argued that Heath's account, along with Betsy Blair's, didn't paint a full picture. He suggested the prosecution selectively presented witness testimonies that supported their case, while ignoring contradictory accounts, including those from David McCain, Shelby Hicks, and Cheyenne Mell, whose statements, Rosie claimed, did not fit the prosecution's narrative. One of Rosie's main points was the ballistics evidence, which he argued was poorly handled and insufficient to link Allen to the crime. He criticized the state for leaning on the so-called magic bullet, a .40 caliber cartridge found at the crime scene, as their primary piece of physical evidence. Rosie argued that this magic bullet was central to the prosecution's case, yet he contended it was inconclusive and unreliable. He noted that ballistics expert Melissa Oberg's analysis did not definitively match Allen's firearm to the cartridge found near the bodies, as her findings showed only insufficient agreement. Rosie argued that Oberg's work was flawed, suggesting that her testing methods were inadequate and that the state's decision not to re-examine the cartridge pointed to their weak case. Additionally, Rosie raised the possibility that other firearms could not be excluded, specifically pointing to Brad Weber's gun as another potential match for the cartridge found at the scene. He noted that the state had failed to consider this possibility, focusing solely on Allen's gun. Rosie argued that the lack of photographic evidence of the cartridge testing further eroded the credibility of the prosecution's case, suggesting the jury should heavily scrutinize this evidence. Rosie turned to the confessions made by Allen, claiming they were unreliable and coerced under extreme psychological distress. He argued that the conditions in which Allen was held, 13 months in solitary confinement with limited human contact, had taken a severe toll on his mental state. According to Rosie, Allen was subjected to conditions that would lead anyone to false memories and hallucinations. Rosie portrayed Allen's confinement as unprecedented and noted that Allen's treatment, which included time in solitary confinement and suicide watch, was akin to medieval torture, showing the jury photos of Allen covered in feces and being dragged in a spit hood. He argued that these conditions could easily drive someone to make unreliable statements or confessions out of desperation. Rosie also suggested that the prosecution's selective use of Allen's statements in prison misrepresented the context, claiming that Allen's mental state had been compromised by his isolation. He highlighted that Dr. Polly Westcott, a neuropsychologist, found Allen's behavior and statements to be the result of severe psychological strain. Rosie argued that Allen's spiritual turn to religion under such dire conditions was natural and did not imply guilt, as the state had suggested. Rosie argued that the digital forensics in this case did not conclusively connect Allen to the crime. He pointed out that no digital records placed Allen at the scene, and the state could not provide any definitive link through Libby German's phone or GPS data. He noted that some digital data on Libby's phone showed activity after her death, raising questions about who was accessing her device and why the prosecution had not explored this further. He argued that there was no trace or DNA evidence to tie Allen to the crime scene, emphasizing that no one had definitively identified Allen as the individual seen in the Bridge Guy video. Rosie also pointed out that the prosecution ignored potential alternative situations or scenarios, such as the possibility of multiple perpetrators or someone approaching the scene from the south side, which he suggested was plausible given the physical demands of the crime. He claimed it was implausible for a single 5'5" man to commit such a violent act, leave no trace, and escape without being noticed. Throughout his argument, Rosie accused the prosecution of cherry-picking evidence and ignoring details that didn't support their case. He pointed to instances like the state's reluctance to perform a height analysis on the Bridge Guy, the lost video interviews from 2017, and the state's delay in looking up registering information on Allen's Ford Focus, which was prompted only by a juror's question. Rosie argued that these issues demonstrated the prosecution's desperation to make an arrest, even if it meant stretching the evidence. Rosie was critical of forensic examiner Chris Cecil, likening his testimony on Allen's Google search history to fast food, suggesting it was hastily presented, superficial, and not fully reliable. He argued that there was no proof Allen actually made the Google searches, claiming they were simply linked to his email account. Finally, Rosie called into question the conclusions drawn by Dr. Roland Kaur, the pathologist who conducted the autopsies on the victims. Rosie claimed that Cory had shifted his opinion over time, initially indicating that multiple weapons might have been involved, but later concluding that a box cutter could have been the primary weapon after consulting with the prosecution. Rosie framed this as an example of the state shaping the evidence to fit their case. Rosie concluded by summarizing 5 components he believed should give the jury reasonable doubt. Lack of witness identification. No one definitively identified Allen as Bridge Guy. Absence of digital evidence. There was no digital data linking Allen to the crime scene. No clothing match. No clothing found matched the description of what Bridge Guy was wearing. No DNA link. There was no DNA evidence connecting Allen to the crime. And no trace material. No trace materials placed Allen at the scene. Rosie made an emotional appeal to the jury, acknowledging the tragedy endured by the victim's family, but urging them to consider the lack of concrete evidence. He argued that the state's magic bullet theory was just a tragic bullet, a weak attempt to create a connection where none existed. In closing, Rosie suggested that the jury would be endorsing inhumane treatment and unreliable tactics by convicting Allen, urging them to, quote, render a verdict of not guilty and set Allen free. He ended by highlighting the disturbing photos of Allen's confinement, arguing that the state's approach to justice in this case was fundamentally flawed. With the defense and prosecution having delivered their closing arguments, the highly scrutinized case is now in the hands of the jury. The jury has the weighty task of deciding the fate of Richard Allen, the man accused of the tragic and highly publicized murders. As the jurors enter deliberation, they must sift through the weeks of complex testimony, physical evidence, and conflicting expert analyses, guided by the principle that their decision should be based solely on the facts presented during the trial and the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. The jury's role is to carefully assess whether the prosecution has met its burden to prove Allen's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They must weigh multiple elements of the case, including the ballistics evidence, digital records, witness testimonies, and Allen's mental state during alleged confessions. The jurors have been instructed to apply their collective judgment, set aside any potential biases, and reach a unanimous verdict based on the evidence. The deliberation process could lead to different outcomes. If the jury unanimously finds Allen guilty, he faces the possibility of a significant sentence reflecting the gravity of the charges. However, if they find reasonable doubt, they may acquit Allen, which would likely ignite public debate over the justice process and the thoroughness of the investigation. In the case of a hung jury, where jurors can't reach a unanimous verdict, a mistrial may be declared, potentially leading to a retrial or even re-evaluation of the evidence. The jury's verdict will not only determine Richard Allen's fate, but it also serves as a response to broader questions raised during the trial about the handling of evidence, the treatment of suspects, and the effectiveness of investigative processes. The case has gripped the public's attention, and whatever decision is reached will undoubtedly leave a lasting impact on the Delphi community. Woo! So we're still waiting, everybody. We are still waiting. But with that being said, even if you thought that was our case in chief, it is not. So here we go. All right, so tonight we are going to talk about Iowa v. McKinley Louisma. Tonight's case, and also big shout out and thanks to Sherry for writing this, the first addition to contribution to Night Court. Yay, glad to have you on board. Yay. Anyways, tonight's case in chief covers the February 17th, 2024 kidnapping, torture, and murder of Melody Hoffman by her boyfriend, McKinley Louisma, and two accomplices, Dakota Van Patten and Logan Kimpton. Although she was 20 years old, Hoffman had an intellectual disability with a mind of a 14-year-old. In opening statements, a prosecutor said what happened to her was depraved, dehumanizing, and defies all reason. This case and trial depend heavily on the use of smartphones and their apps for evidence. For true crime followers, we know this to be a fact. Smartphones, they're tattletales. Big ones. They either tell on you by revealing your location and activity, or they reveal you aren't following your normal pattern. I'm going to give my extremely expensive camera one more go. One more shot, buddy. All right. Smartphones are as loyal as to the user as internet searches are loyal to the searcher. Cecil knows this. In other words, they have no loyalty to the user or the searcher. Smartphones, computer searches, automobile infotainment centers, and DNA will all bite you in the rear. In addition, Walmart and their top-notch surveillance systems often have a supporting role in true crime. This case, no exception. McKinley Louisma is charged with first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit a forcible felony. Boy, he looks angry. Louisma did not waive his right to a speedy trial, but both his accomplices did. Prosecution opening statement. Prosecutors said video surveillance, phone, and other electronic data, as well as DNA evidence, show where the defendants and Melody traveled and what happened to her that night. Prosecutors say that Melody Hoffman willingly met McKinley Louisma at Morgan Creek Park because she trusted him. It was there that she was kidnapped and ultimately ended up at Lily Pond. Louisma and Van Patten used a handle of a machete and struck Melody in the face. They terrorized and tortured her, the prosecutor said. They bound her hands and legs with duct tape, put her in the trunk of Louisma's car, and then went to Lily Pond in Amana. They strangled her with a paracord, stabbed her in the back, and slashed and mutilated her body. The prosecutor said they tried to stage it as if she had been attacked, stripped of her clothing, and left at the pond. Evidence of the kidnapping and torture was found in Louisma's car: a paracord, knife with blood on it, and machetes. Louisma admitted to police that he handled those items, and they had also been handled by Van Patten. Louisma's defense attorney said that Louisma was at Morgan Creek Park and Lily Pond that night, and he was also there when Hoffman was beaten and died. Strong start. She added, "This case isn't as straightforward as the state leads you to believe." Go on. She said that Louisma had no plan or agreement with Van Patten. They weren't acting together. Louisma didn't strangle her or cut her, and that Louisma didn't beat her, and Louisma didn't kill her. She added that none of the DNA found on the items found in Louisma's care matched his DNA. The DNA did match Hoffman, Kimpton, and Van Patten. Melody Hoffman and McKinley Louisma met on a dating app in October of 2023 and soon began dating. Melody's mother, Megan Hoffman, regarded Louisma as polite and said he and her daughter seemed to have a good relationship. When it comes to the mom's testimony, Melody Hoffman still lived at home in Marion, Iowa, with her mother and volunteered at an animal control center, but she didn't have any friends. She was described by prosecutors as overly trusting and easily manipulated and controlled due to her lack of experience with others. At the time she met Louisma, she wanted attention from men and a boyfriend. Megan Hoffman testified that she thought Melody broke it off in December 2023 because Louisma began lying to her and the lies became more frequent. She had advised her daughter to break it off because she knew he was having a baby with another woman. Megan said Melody took the breakup hard but that it had been amicable. She said there were no issues until Melody received threatening text messages from a phone number she did not know. In part, the text said that Melody was a dead girl and, quote, when you least expect it, we're gonna get you. Melody was also told that, quote, she and her family ain't safe and they would, quote, paint your whole house red. The text was reported to police, but no one was arrested. Due to Melody's disability, Megan Hoffman always tracked her daughter's phone and other electronics using 2 different location apps. She also had a camera set up in the living room. The location apps enabled Megan to track Melody's movements on February 17th, leading up to her slaying. On February 17th, 2024, after dinner and a movie at home, Megan and Melody went to bed around 11:14 p.m. But Megan left the house about 11:27 p.m., as confirmed by the living room camera. Megan continued to track Melody and saw she was going to Morgan Creek Park, which is on the west edge of Cedar Rapids, then to the Cherry Hill area in northwest Cedar Rapids. Louisma's family lived in the Cherry Hill area. Melody's location then came back to Marion, about 2 blocks from the apartment home Megan and Melody shared. Megan received a Snapchat from Melody after 1 a.m., and she said she was on her way home and asked that the door be left unlocked. Melody's location turned off at 1:17 a.m. on February 18th, 2024. Megan suspected these texts weren't from Melody because the words were spelled out and Megan used shortcuts in texts. And Megan had a key and would have no reason to ask for the door to be left unlocked. At 3:13 a.m., Megan received a crash detection notification from Melody's phone on the ramp on Highway 100 from Edgewood Road. Melody's aunt also received this notification and went to search for the crash, but didn't find it. At 3:39 a.m., Megan sent a Facebook message to Louisma asking if he was with Melody. He replied he wasn't, but didn't respond to further questioning from her. At about 4 a.m., Megan drove to the crash site and parked. Megan used Melody's iPad to send a text message to her phone, and after hearing an alert outside the car, she found Melody's phone on the road. Megan then searched Melody's social media accounts and texts for clues on Melody's location, but found nothing. Megan drove to the Marion Police Department in the morning on February 18th to report her daughter missing. Police took her daughter's phone to investigate the tracked locations. State civilian witness attorney Nakia Svoboda testified that she was in a long-term relationship with Louisma. They met on a dating app in 2020. Their first meeting that same year was at the Lily Pond in Amana, the same location where Melody Hoffman's body was found. Svoboda testified their relationship was on again, off again. She said Louisma was jealous of her. Louisma and Svoboda broke up on July 4th, 2023, and she started dating Matthew Clark. But she stayed in touch with Louisma during the 3 months she dated Clark. Svoboda said she didn't know about Melody at first, but learned later he was dating her. But she gave him an ultimatum in December of 2023 to choose between the two of them. On the day Melody was killed, February 17th, 2024, Svoboda and Louisma were living with Svoboda's grandmother. Svoboda was pregnant, but didn't know if Louisma or Clark was the father, but Louisma believed the child was his. That day, Svoboda had complications with her pregnancy, and her grandmother took her to the hospital. Louisma joined them later. Svoboda said Louisma was acting off and wasn't himself. He wouldn't answer her and stayed on his phone watching videos. Later that night, Louisma told her he was going to his parents, and he left with a ski mask, which she said was odd, and was wearing work boots. Svoboda tracked Louisma's location through a phone app after he left, but at some point it was turned off. Her calls to him went to voicemail. He also didn't answer her text messages. He returned home between 2 and 4 a.m. on February 18th. Svoboda didn't see his ski mask when he returned. She said he gave her a hug and kiss, and she smelled smoke on him, which was strange because he doesn't smoke. Court documents report that Louisma was seen on a surveillance camera smoking cigars with Van Patten after they allegedly killed Melody. Witness Amy Robas testified that she was at the Lily Pond on February 18th listening to an audiobook, which she does regularly about 9:30 a.m. At one point, she saw a couple walking toward her car, and they seemed agitated. They told her they saw something on the shoreline, and they asked her to take a look. She discovered that it was a human body. She could tell it was a young woman. She testified the body had pale, perfect skin and glorious curls. She also testified that the woman wasn't moving and had slashes and gashes all over her. The 911 call was played for the jury, in which Robasi said the woman was only wearing underwear and a bra. She told the dispatcher that she might have been sexually assaulted because of her lack of clothing. Trevor Weiss testified he knew Louisma as Ken, and while they weren't friends, Louisma gave him rides to work. Weiss said Louisma and his girlfriend lived with Weiss's mother, and Quinton was his cousin. Louisma gave Weiss a ride home from work about 10:58 p.m. on February 17th, and Van Patten was in the car with Louisma. Weiss testified the next day Louisma came to his house and told him, quote, "If someone asks about his whereabouts, tell them he, Weiss, was with him, Louisma, all night long playing video games." Brandon Monson testified that on February 17th, Quinton told him and two others that he was involved in a plan to murder someone with Louisma and Van Patten. Quinton told Monson it was going to happen that night. Monson testified that Quinton was always joking about stuff like that, and he didn't know if this was true or whether Quinton was just joking or not this time. Weird thing to joke about. Tyam Mayer testified Van Patten came to her home on February 17th. He said he needed to talk to her, and he seemed to have a weird type of vibe. He told her he had killed Hoffman and said Louisma also was involved. She testified that Van Patten wouldn't tell her why they did it, only that it, quote, had to be done. She said she got scared and told him to leave. She said she wanted to call the police, but she didn't know what Van Patten would do. Law enforcement also testified last week. An investigator with the Iowa County Sheriff's Department testified that the woman was lying face down and dead. He said she had lacerations and stab wounds to her back. He said there was little blood at the scene, and he didn't think the homicide had occurred at the pond. She also had defensive wounds and cuts to her fingers and hands. A health app on Melody's phone proved instrumental in the investigation. Detective Adam Paulson testified that despite the phone being damaged and running a beta version of Apple's new operating system, information about its activity was retrieved. One notable bit of data was the fact that the phone had connected to a wireless network. The phone showed it connected to the OnePlus Nord N2005G network twice on February 18th, 2024, Paulson testified. The last manual connection was at 1:01 a.m., and the last auto connection occurred at 2:52 a.m. The network belonged to alleged accomplice Dakota Van Patten. Paulson added that the password for the network, 1132 DLVP, lined up with the man's initials, Dakota Lyle Van Patten. Paulson testified, quote, "During the interview with Dakota Van Patten, we asked for the word to his hotspot, and he recited it from memory." Really? His own hotspot? As Bugs Bunny says, what a maroon. Thanks for putting that in there, Sherry. Prosecutors also introduced information from Melody's Apple Health app, which Paulson explained captured the dramatic spike in Melody's heart rate around the midnight hour of February 18th, and then an abrupt end to any data being sent. Paulson testified, quote, "You could see an extreme change from trending resting heart rate to a very high moment. Then the heart rate data stopped entirely." The app experienced a decibel event around the same time as Hoffman's heart rate spike. According to the detective, the cessation of data meant that the device monitoring her heart had been removed from her body or her heart had stopped. A surveillance video of Louisma, Van Patten, and Kimpton in Walmart marked the free spot on that bingo card earlier in the night of February 17th, buying machetes and rubber gloves. Does nobody who's checking them out think this is weird? Louisma is seen paying for these items along with flavored water and cookies, because why not? The prosecution introduced traffic camera footage and convenience store surveillance footage to map Louisma's movements on the night of Hoffman's disappearance. Traffic cameras later recorded his vehicle heading southwest in the direction of Lily Pond area in the Amana colonies, where Hoffman's body was discovered. Dashcam footage from Marion police officer Aaron Stark added another layer to that timeline. At approximately 1:17 a.m. on February 18th, Officer Stark's patrol vehicle passed Louisma's car in close proximity to Hoffman's residence. More footage from a Quick Star gas station at 3:17 a.m. on February 18th showed Louisma and Van Patten entering the store, making a purchase, and briefly visiting the bathroom. The pair bought Black and Mild cigars and Marlboro cigarettes, which Paulson described as, quote, small, pocket-sized items. He confirmed that the defendants had nothing big enough in their hands that needed to be put in Louisma's trunk, a place where Melody Hoffman could have been placed at the time. As the defendants were allegedly en route to Amana, where her body was later found, Detective Michael Pope told the jury that several interesting objects were discovered in Van Patten's residence. They found a green paracord that was similar to the one that bound Melody. A machete was found underneath a bed in the house. Other items included a serrated knife retrieved from a non-operational freezer in the basement, and clear eyeglasses found near the TV stand. Also found were gray Nike shoes that were consistent with the shoes worn by Van Patten as seen in video, as well as the dark green Under Armour hoodie that was seen in surveillance footage. Defense attorneys argued that none of the objects removed from the residence had Louisma's DNA on them. Sergeant Thomas Peterson, with the Marion Police Department, who helped lead the investigation into her death, also testified. He shared cell phone data that showed search history indicating Louisma searched Walmart online for a machete, a weapon that was used in the murder. Additionally, location data showed that Louisma was at both Morgan Creek Park, where the murder is said to have taken place, as well as Lily Lake, where Hoffman's body was found. He explained that the data matched up with the path that Louisma would have had to take. Quote, the first steps, the 320, were likely walking out towards where Melody's body was located, then walking back, and then for whatever reason running back to that location, and then back to the car, wherever they had parked. The prosecution also shared Facebook messages between Hoffman and Louisma a matter of weeks before her death, showing that the two had been arguing, with Hoffman at one point threatening to call the police on Louisma if he returned to her house. Other evidence added harrowing details to what we know about Hoffman's last moments alive. Sergeant Peterson presented a photograph found on Louisma's phone that depicted Hoffman bound with duct tape sealing her mouth, hair tangled in the adhesive, and blood on her face. She appears to be crying, Peterson testified. Another photo on the phone of Louisma's co-defendant, Dakota Van Patten, appeared to show Van Patten wearing Hoffman's clear framed glasses. Those are the same glasses found in the search of Van Patten's home. The prosecution is presenting evidence against all three of the accused and trying both Van Patten and Kimpton to Louisma, tying them to Louisma through the digital data and surveillance evidence. There is also physical evidence of Hoffman having been in Louisma's vehicle. Defense attorneys keep pointing out that none of the DNA evidence found to date has belonged to Louisma. The prosecution ended the week with expert testimony of iPhones and Snapchat, all of which led to a Snapchat conversation allegedly between Melody Hoffman and McKinley Louisma, setting up their rendezvous on February 17th, 2024 at 11:24 p.m. The prosecution reserved the right to recall this witness at a later time as they ended for the day. Since Monday is a federal holiday, testimony will resume on Tuesday, November 12th, 2024 at 9 a.m. If convicted of the charged crimes, Louisma faces a mandatory life sentence. Now, just as a note, Dakota Van Patten faces the same charges for which, champs, faces the same charges for which McKinley Louisma is presently on trial: first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit a forcible felony. He pleaded not guilty, and his trial is scheduled for March 5th, 2025. Logan Kimpton is charged with assault with injury without intent, willful injury causing bodily injury, conspiracy to commit non-forcible felony, and a conspiracy to commit a forcible felony. He pleaded not guilty, and his trial date is December 10th, 2024. Wow. What a story. Oh, man. I hope that she gets the justice that she so rightfully deserves. This is terrible and horrible. I don't have to tell you guys that. That's Captain Obvious over here, right? All right. Well, now that we've gone through the case in chief, let's get to just desserts, shall we? So tonight we wrap up the trial of Georgia v. Melody Walker Farris. This case has captivated the public. It's captivated us here on this show for a couple of weeks. And it's easy to see why. It's got everything: family, drama, forensic evidence, enough twists to keep even a soap opera writer taking notes. Even YouTuber Recovery Addict ended up as an exhibit in the case, Barton Exhibit 1. That's great. Much to his surprise, bless your heart witness Martha Jane Barton testified she watched The Little Man in the Corner when her stepson Rusty Barton testified. It's like a reality show, a true... You know what? That is a classic RA face right there. That's awesome. It's like a reality show, a true crime special, and a family therapy session all rolled into one. All we're missing is a theme song and a commercial break. Melody Walker Farris's case centers on the murder of Gary Farris, a prominent Atlanta attorney whose remains were found buried on the family's Cherokee County property in July of 2018. Melody, his wife of 38 years, was accused of shooting him and disposing of his body in a backyard burn pile. The couple's marriage was reportedly strained by financial disputes and Melody's affairs. Prosecutors argued that Melody had the motive and opportunity to commit the murder, while the defense claimed there were too many unanswered questions, even suggesting that Melody's son Scott could be involved due to his access to a .38 caliber ammunition. Despite the defense's efforts, a jury found Melody guilty on all charges. Standing stoic and emotionless, Melody heard the verdict read: guilty of malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, concealing the death of another, and making a false statement. Superior Court Judge David L. Cannon Jr. even took the extra step of polling each juror, confirming their unanimous decision. Well, at least Melody's going to get a new mugshot. No, not any better. Sentencing is going to be taking place in December. Quinton Nixon, a 31-year-old from Akron, Ohio, skibbity-doo, faces charges in the July 2022 fatal shooting of 34-year-old Tony Westover, a beloved local medical assistant. The case has captured the attention of Akron's community due to the many unexpected turns of the legal proceedings, including Nixon's surprising decision to represent himself in court. Oh, Lord, here we go. Listen, representing yourself in court is like being a kid who insists, I can pour my own milk. I mean, listen, it's cute, see, until you realize that this is simply a mini Noah who is creating an ark for his animal crackers, and he's ready to sacrifice the house for his method acting. Oh, boy. Look at that. He's even got like a real giraffe or something in the milk. That's a good one. The incident occurred on July 25th, 2022 at a residence on Maryland Avenue in Akron. Police reports indicate that an argument escalated between Nixon and Westover, leading to a fatal gunshot wound for Westover. Following the shooting, Nixon fled, resulting in a large-scale police search that ultimately led to his capture. Law enforcement officials, supported by a SWAT team, although perhaps that should be the other way around because, let's be honest, apprehended Nixon in early August of 2022 after a tense standoff. This high-stakes arrest brought increased scrutiny to the case, with local media closely following the details. Nixon's trial has drawn like a caricature from the TV show Pappyland. That's a very deep cut. If you get that, this is why we're friends. Added attention. Obviously, I haven't seen some of these AI generated things. This is great. Due to his, added attention due to his choice to act as his own defense attorney. Representing oneself in a murder trial is generally rare, as it involves navigating criminal law, procedures, and courtroom decorum. For Nixon, who lacks formal training, this decision adds layers of complexity to an already serious case. You know, like ogres, which are like onions and not like parfaits. So, damn it, get that right. Court records suggest Nixon's self-representation has introduced unique dynamics to the case. You don't say. Say it ain't so. A criminal representing themselves in court is like a raccoon showing up at your wedding as the caterer. It's like, listen, I know you're excited to be here, but you don't really know what you're doing. They're standing in a suit they probably borrowed from their uncle, saying things like objection, I think. And the judge is just sitting there like, oh boy, this is going to be a long day. Listen, it's the legal equivalent of a toddler trying to drive a car. It's technically possible, but it's incredibly dangerous for everyone involved. In October of 2024, the trial was delayed and rescheduled for November 5th, 2024, due to unforeseen evidentiary issues, which some experts said might be partly due to the challenges of managing a self-represented defense. Someone hook this dude up with a lifeline. Where's Regis when you need him? Is that your final answer? It's great. Nixon's approach in court has been a focal point, and with live stream broadcasts available, the public has had an up-close view of the trial proceedings. Viewers have seen him handle everything from opening statements to cross-examinations himself, making the trial a legal drama on top of it being a criminal case. But in the end, his choice was the wrong one, as is so often is, as can be seen here by a woman who enjoys looking straight through brick walls into somebody's soul. Jeez. All right. November 6th, 2024, Quinton Nixon was found guilty of murdering Tony Westover by a jury of his peers. Judge Christine Croce, not related, told Nixon that he had done a great and grave disservice. Those are her words, not mine, to himself by choosing to represent himself at trial. Come on, man. Didn't you see the last one that happened? It didn't go well for him either. All right. So, in March of 2024, Cory Martin, a Queens resident, was convicted of a chilling and calculated murder. This case involved Martin's actions as both a pimp and an orchestrator of his scheme to murder and dismember his victim, 26-year-old Brandy Odom. This was in an effort to collect on life insurance policies he had fraudulently obtained in her name. Brandy Odom was a young woman struggling with difficult circumstances, and Martin exploited her vulnerability. He had allegedly assumed control over aspects of her life, ultimately plotting to take her life for his financial gain. Before the murder, Martin watched popular crime shows such as Dexter and The First 48, seemingly attempting to glean strategies for covering up violent acts. This points to obvious premeditated effort and a profound disregard for human life. Martin meticulously planned the murder alongside his co-conspirator, Adele Anderson, also no relation. They purchased a reciprocating saw and a variety of cleaning supplies to carry out an attempt to cover up the crime, most likely from a Walmart because a pimp's already a target. In a move that shows disturbing foresight, Martin lined the bathroom with garbage bags before dismembering Odom's body to avoid leaving physical evidence. He then discarded her remains in Canarsie Park, Brooklyn. The discovery of body parts shocked the community, with investigators and locals alike horrified by the brutality of the crime. The very public and indiscriminate disposal of Odom's remains brought immediate attention to the case and spurred a multi-agency investigation, turning what Martin may have hoped would go unnoticed into a high-profile search for justice. In the days following the crime, Martin searched online for articles and updates regarding the discovery of Odom's body parts, and action investigators say points to his keen awareness of his crime's impact. Meanwhile, he and Anderson made repeated, albeit unsuccessful, attempts to claim insurance benefits using the fraudulent policies he had taken out in Odom's name. This was no small scheme. Martin had apparently crafted an entire financial plan around a murder, highlighting a frighteningly cold and calculating move. The use of fraudulent life insurance policies is a disturbing trend in cases involving financial exploitation and homicide. Martin's case underscores how some criminals attempt to turn human lives into investments for profit, seeking to cash in on the ultimate betrayal. The judge, recognizing the calculated and brutal nature of the crime, handed Martin a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole. This sentencing provided a measure of closure to Odom's family and community, though the horrific details will likely leave a lasting impact. The case of Cory Martin serves as a stark reminder of the horrific lengths to which some will go for financial gain, even at the cost of another person's life. This high-profile case captured widespread attention not only because of its brutal nature, but also due to Martin's audacious attempts to cover up the crime while seemingly believing he could get away with it. The media played a critical role in keeping the public informed, ensuring the crime and its details were not swept under the rug. As Robin Williams might have quipped at some point, the one crime Dexter never covered was how to not get caught because you're watching Dexter. It's cases like these that highlight just how far some will go and just how well the justice system needs to respond. Now, Owen Skyler Shover, could be Shover, I'm going to call him Shover because you'll find out, 23, was from Hesperia, a large city in San Bernardino County, 80 miles northeast of Los Angeles. In January of 2019, over 5 years ago, he killed Aranda Isabel Briones, 16, and then buried her somewhere in San Bernardino mountains nearby, which have been described as unforgivable. It's where Californians put on their brand new outdoorsy jackets, hike up 3 switchbacks, and promptly decide that nature might actually be best enjoyed from a scenic lookout point with snacks. On January 13th, 2019, 2 of Aranda's friends saw her get into Shover's Nissan Versa. You know, because sometimes you want a car that says, "I'm practical, humble, and I don't want to be asked to help anyone move." Everything applies to Shover except for the practical and the humble. Well, okay, just trying to avoid helping people. There's nothing better than buying a Versa and not just getting a car, but making a solid commitment to underwhelming power and unparalleled gas mileage. After she entered his vehicle, she vanished. The only trace of her left was her blood, found pooled in the trunk of Shover's vehicle. But this wasn't something spur of the moment or impetuous. The relationship between Shover and Aranda goes back further, he says, as he makes another change again. That's why I can't have nice things. The story goes that these 2 were once good pals, both attending Moreno Valley High. But on November 7th, 2017, they took the whole skip school and hang out at the park thing to a new level. This wasn't your usual group of kids avoiding math class. No. They brought a little extra credit to the park that day. Shover had a small handgun. I thought out. Shover had a small handgun on him, which, by the way, Not usually the kind of thing you see in a backpack alongside some PB&Js and some homework. Things got interesting when a truancy officer showed up. Well, I'd call that busted. He's an adult with a clipboard and a mission to enforce attendance. You're busted. Shover, thinking quickly, or perhaps not thinking at all, chucked the gun over to Briones and yelled, "Hide it." What a gentleman. According to Riverside County District Attorney Mike Hestron, who prepared a brief on the incident, it was a real-life version of hot potato, only with a slightly higher risk factor. Well, as one would do, Aranda panicked. She immediately threw the gun into a drainage canal and apparently was caught disposing of the firearm. Now, when she was questioned by law enforcement and school officials, she told the truth. The gun belonged to Shover, and he was the one who gave it to her. Following this, in February of 2018, both Aranda and Shover were expelled. Aranda moved to another school, but stayed in the district, while the boy was forced to move in with his father in Hesperia, 50 miles north. This is a pretty remote location, just Joshua trees and cacti, nature's oddest odd couple. One stands there looking like it's practicing yoga poses. The other is basically a green pincushion that could only be featured on Jackass daring Steve-O to give it a hug. During the jury trial that began on August 12th, prosecutors argued that Shover was bitter toward Aranda, which only grew and grew with time. There were a series of social media interactions from November 2018 through January 2019 in which Shover worked to obtain a handgun. Then on January 12th, 2019, he asked her to hang out with him again. He promised something of the Wild West to her. Apparently, she would accompany him on drug deliveries. What you just said. Apparently, she would accompany him on drug deliveries and ride along as he, quote, robs drug dealers. It seems that the break in friendship was repaired. They met at Bayside Park at 5 p.m. on the next day. Within an hour, she was posting photos of the old friends being reunited, happy to be with the homie once more, and happy to be allowed to do some of the driving. Minutes before 6 p.m., the car was headed north toward a trailer park in San Bernardino County. Along the way, Shover messaged his brother, "Be ready for tonight. Get shovels and lighter fluid ready." That's about right. So he messaged his brother, "Be ready for tonight. Get shovels and lighter fluid ready." The Shover brothers, which is just really fun to say, Owen and Gary, went into the mountains. Between 8:30 p.m. and 10:15 p.m., there isn't a good indication of exactly where they traveled due to a lack of cellular phone data. Owen's phone turned back on again when he returned to his father's house. Gary, 27, pleaded guilty in March to one count of accessory after the fact, to which Owen said, "Come on, man, that pretty much kills my case." He was sentenced to 1 year in the county jail, followed by 12 months of probation. The older brother was initially charged in Briones' murder and the lying in wait enhancement as well. But the charge was dismissed in 2022. In the end, the older Shover did admit to the cover-up, but not the underlying crime. A neighbor, when asked, said investigators retrieved blankets and clothing from holes in the brother's backyard. Now, listen, when I was a kid, you dug holes in the yard to find buried treasure, not buried evidence. Can you imagine the neighbor watching this? "Oh, look, honey, they're doing some late-night gardening with the shovel and a suspiciously large bag." Nothing says I'm totally innocent like playing hide-and-seek with crime scene evidence. Note to self, the backyard is not a filing cabinet for felonious evidence. Somebody write that down for me. Well, Owen wasn't going that easily, and he opted for a 6-day trial. After a day of deliberations, though, Riverside County jurors sealed his fate. like an envelope during election season. The death penalty is effectively non-existent in California, so he faced a mandatory term of life in prison without the possibility of parole. On October 25th, he learned his fate. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars, something that I'm not sad about, because he has a face you simply want to slap. This one, right here. A face only a mother could love. And even then, she keeps the lights dim and wears sunglasses. It's a face you could tolerate. Maybe, after a few margaritas. And even his brother said, "Oh, Owen, let's just work on the inside, because the outside could be confused with our beagle's ass." I needed that. During sentencing, Riverside County Superior Court Judge Timothy J. Hollenhurst said, "There are many questions left unanswered, none more than where is Aranda? Mr. Shover, from what I can tell about you, it appears that you are not capable of feeling remorse. So I do not intend to lecture you on how devastating your actions were in this case. However, there is no question in this court's mind that you are the face of pure evil." See? My jokes weren't wrong. There you have it. Just desserts. Let's get into closing arguments. Well, there you got it. Our justice system and world in all its quirky, maddening, and occasionally terrifying glory. Also to include all kinds of camera fun. From ballot box brawlers, from DIY defense attorneys, from hackers demanding breadsticks over Bitcoin, it's safe to say that we're living in some interesting times. Perhaps we're witnessing a renaissance of the bizarre. Darn it. Never again. I gotta figure out why it's doing it. It's so embarrassing. Ha. Perhaps we are witnessing a renaissance of the bizarre, where criminals keep us guessing with demands for the baguettes, or insist on skipping the lawyer in favor of the ever-trusty "I got this" approach. Spoiler alert, you don't. But if tonight's episode taught us anything, it's that true crime has a way of outdoing fiction. I mean, a do-it-yourself Dexter wannabe who forgot the "don't get caught" part. A man who actually thought self-representation was a solid plan. It's almost enough to make you miss the quiet days of white-collar crime. So until next time, remember, don't hit anybody. Don't consider yourself a fire starter. If you're going to represent yourself in court, at least practice pouring your own milk first. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Thanks to our viewers, subscribers, especially to our mods, for being here and for keeping peace in the chat, and for making each episode a place where we can laugh, learn, and sometimes just shake our heads together, even if it's at me. A huge thanks as well to our all-star crew, producer Tara, AP Amy, and researcher writer Sherry. You are part of what makes this show not just a broadcast, but a community. And just so everybody knows, and I mentioned this, I think, on Friday, but just so everybody knows, the crew has written, over the past 6 episodes, has written just over 600 pages. Size 14 font double spaced, but that's just over 300 pages single spaced. And not only that, but that's on top of everything else that they are doing for this channel. You see, for Night Court and this channel and the other shows, but specifically to this instance of Night Court, we really believe in this show. And we hope that you do as well. So if you did enjoy this show, if you believe in this show and tonight's episode, make sure that you like and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment down below and follow us on social media for more updates during the week and behind the scenes content. I'm going to start recording mini stories and things for members as well, so you'll be getting those soon. Don't forget that the best way to support is by doing what I just mentioned, along with sharing the video for the replay crew or reposting our YouTube shorts. Anything is helpful. And just one share has exponential possibilities. Be sure to tune in next week when we cover the hottest true crime and trial updates, as we usually do. And we're going to take a deep dive into the case of Florida v. somebody with another funny name, Cory Shaver. I'm JT, and I will see you all next Sunday at 8 p.m. for another episode of Night Court. Goodbye for now, night owls. Get some rest, and I'll see you on the flip side.